Hey, what is going on guys? Danny here, and in this video, I wanted to talk to you guys about a topic that's been on my mind for a while now. Should first generation Ryzen owners upgrade to the second generation Zen Plus or Ryzen 2000 series processors? Well, that question can be answered in more than one way. It's not a simple yes or no question. There are a few factors that need to be looked at, such as what is the state of your current Ryzen build, what games you primarily play, and what are some things you plan on doing in the future. It only seems like it was a few months ago where we saw AMD's comeback in the CPU market with the release of Ryzen along with all the AM4 motherboards. But a new year is here, which means a release of a new generation is upon us. Recently, I made a video talking about some specifications which were reported regarding Zen Plus at CES 2018 from AMD. Link for that video will be down below, so check it out if you're interested. What we mainly learned from that event was that the new Ryzen Plus 2000 series processors will be on the new 12nm LP process, feature higher clocks, Precision Boost 2, along with some architectural tweaks which should help reduce latencies. No exact specifications were given, so pretty much everything up until this point is speculation. However, what we do know is that the 12nm LP process should provide 10% better performance over their 14nm solutions. Zen Plus won't have any significant architecture changes. That is what Zen 2 is set out to do. Therefore, any performance improvements you will see will be mostly due to the uplift in frequencies, but reduced latency communication between the two CCXs and better memory compatibility will also help. So perhaps adding on a 2 to 4% IPC boost could be probable. 10% better performance means that a 4.1 GHz boost is now a 4.5 GHz boost. With the first generation Ryzen CPUs, the majority of overclockers were settling for frequencies around 3.8 to 4 GHz depending on the quality of your silicon, but usually that's where most were settling until you had to go all crazy with voltages. Taking that into account, I'd expect second generation Ryzen owners to settle for frequencies around 4.2 to 4.4 GHz, with those golden chips hitting 4.5 GHz. Remember that a 4.1 GHz boost means that it's only boosting one core via XFR, not all cores. One of the things that I mentioned was that a first generation Ryzen owner will have to evaluate the current state of their build and assess areas where improvements can be made. I'll start off with myself. If you've been following my channel for a while now, you all know that I've pretty much pushed my Ryzen system to its limits. I have my 1800X overclocked to 4 GHz, and I have my RAM overclocked to 3333 MHz with tighter timings. I did try to push my RAM to 3466 MHz, but unfortunately it wasn't stable even with stock timings. Only with the timings relaxed would I have it stable at this frequency. But it got to the point where 3466 MHz with looser timings resulted in performance regression over 3333 MHz with tighter timings than stock. Nonetheless, I'm pretty happy with where I'm at currently, and if it just so happens that a future BIOS update lets me go further, it will be an extra bonus. With that said, to someone like me, there's not a lot that's intriguing about the next generation Ryzen 2000 series processors. Going from a 4 GHz overclock to perhaps a 4.3 GHz, and the possibility of maybe running my RAM at 3600 MHz with acceptable timings wouldn't be a substantial upgrade. And when I bring RAM into the equation, I sure as hell don't mean buying new sticks, not with the ridiculous RAM prices we're dealing with anyways. It just wouldn't make much sense. With how much the first generation Ryzen processors have been discounted, I'd have to sell my 1800X for a complete bargain. And I wouldn't be looking at anything other than the 8-core processors because downgrading my core and thread count doesn't make much sense to me. So for me to sell my 1800X for cheap, then for full price buy a 2800X or R7 2700 for a 300 MHz uplift doesn't make it worth it. It's not a big enough jump. And I take it that most Ryzen owners who have a system like mine, completely maxed out, won't be making the jump as well, unless they can upgrade for next to nothing. So for the crowd that's already enjoying the most out of the Ryzen system, the answer is probably a no. Now that's just one scenario I have looked at here, and there are many others out there where an upgrade would be a lot more compelling. For example, there might have been someone who at the time of building their first generation Ryzen system could have been on a tighter budget, and perhaps their plan is to upgrade down the road once they've saved up enough money. This individual could be using a lower end Ryzen processor like the R3 1200 along with some cheaper RAM. An 8GB stick of DDR4 memory clocked at either 2133 or 2400 MHz on a B350 motherboard. So for this Ryzen owner, upgrading to a Ryzen 2600 or R7 2700 would be a pretty significant upgrade. The R3 1200 is just a 4-core 4-thread processor. They would not only increase their core and thread count, but also the increase in single core performance can be quite beneficial. Furthermore, if they decide to upgrade to 16GB of 3000 MHz or 3200 MHz RAM, that alone can bring some drastic improvements. But assuming this user doesn't buy new RAM because of how steep prices are currently, they'd still have a much better chance of attaining a decent overclock with their current memory due to the better memory compatibility and an improved IMC. So going from a R3 1200 with just 4 cores with slow RAM to an 8-core 16-thread R7 2700 with faster 3000 MHz RAM would be an immense upgrade. Also remember that in order to make the switch, the user will simply have to drop in a new processor into their current AM4 motherboard. In fact, many motherboard manufacturers such as Gigabyte, Asus, and MSI have been rolling out BIOS updates which state they have support for the Pinnacle Ridge processors, aka Ryzen 2000 series. Therefore, making the upgrade process is easy as long as you update the BIOS of your motherboard first. Overall, the performance jump here should make the upgrade justifiable for owners of a first generation lower core count Ryzen processor in everyday computing, and also allowing the user to branch out to different applications, which brings me to my next point. What has changed or will be changing for you in the future to warrant an upgrade which requires more CPU power? If you currently have a lower core count first generation Ryzen CPU, and you've decided that you want to game, record, and stream at the same time, then yeah, an upgrade would be justified there. If you're playing a game which is already hammering away at all 4 cores, then you can forget about streaming entirely. Yes, there are solutions like AMD's Relive and Nvidia's Share or Shadowplay, which can allow a user to stream, but many tests and results have been posted online that show at lower bit rates, CPU encoding displays higher quality than the other two option. I bring that up because Twitch and YouTube's guidelines for live encoding show rather low bitrate recommendations. Another thing you might be interested in doing is video editing, rendering, and transcoding. These programs really need all the CPU power they can get, and if you're serious about this sort of work, an upgrade to a 12-thread or 16-thread CPU can be pretty useful. These are just a couple examples I've given you that can be used as reasons why a user with a first generation lower core count Ryzen CPU will find it worth it for them to upgrade to the next generation for a higher core count 6 or 8 core CPU. For guys like myself who are already doing this type of stuff and have a higher core count CPU, the next step for us would be Threadripper if your workload demands it. The next area that I want to talk about was gaming. Many games are scaling beyond 4 cores and are benefiting from them. That's not to say that a quad core is obsolete, it will do the job for a budget build. What I personally experienced when moving from a quad core to an 8-core 16-thread processor was that my minimums, 1% and 0.1% lows were better overall. Even if your average frame rate doesn't improve as much, if the variation in frame rate is lower, then what you end up with is a smoother experience. I'd rather take that over a higher average frame rate that's still a stutter fest. Back when I used to game on my 6600K with a 4.6 GHz overclock, I remember many games would push all 4 cores to 100%, and this would introduce some stuttering which can be quite distracting and hinder your performance to play. However, having 16 threads to handle the game's resources, background workloads, and having the headroom to work with other applications definitely helped alleviate those issues. On the other hand, let's be real here, unfortunately, not every game out there, and some that are even coming out today, take advantage of more than 4 cores, and instead prefer to rely on single core performance. Popular MMOs are notorious for this, and I showed a comparison a while back where an overclocked quad core in ESO would perform better than a lower clocked 8-core 16-thread processor. PUBG is another game that is shown to favor core frequency over core count. In fact, a lot of other popular esports/Twitch titles, like Overwatch and CSGO, displayed similar results. So if you play a lot of games where single core performance does play an important role, then the next generation Ryzen CPUs might intrigue you once we see how much they improve on single core performance and how high they overclock. This is an area I hope AMD have addressed, as they desperately need to close the gap in some popular games. But do keep in mind, the emphasis on single core performance is mostly relevant at 1080p and lower resolutions. If you're gaming at 1440p or higher, I'd save the money and spend it on a better GPU. I play at 1440p, and what I find is that my GPU is the bottleneck in pretty much all the games I play. So these were areas I wanted to bring to your guys' attention and inform you all on some important things to keep in mind if you're a first generation Ryzen owner who's thinking about possibly upgrading to the next generation. Of course, there are going to be many other reasons people will have to justify an upgrade. I obviously can't cover all of them in this video. Going back to myself, I'm not going to completely eliminate the possibility of upgrading to a Ryzen Plus processor. If I can upgrade without hurting the wallet too much, sure, I'll consider it. I wouldn't expect any dramatic performance changes with my system if I did though. That's what I actually want from an upgrade, that brings greater noticeable improvements. That's why I'm more focused on Zen 2, which should deliver on my expectations of a larger leap in IPC and frequencies. Zen 2 will be on the 7nm FinFET process. According to Global Foundries, the 7nm FinFET process will provide 40% greater performance over their 14nm solutions and attain 5 GHz operation. We'll have to see how this will all translate into AMD's hands. Lots of exciting stuff though, but that won't be for a while now. Don't expect to hear anything about Zen 2 until late 2018 or early 2019. Well guys, that wraps up this one. If you found this video to be informative and enjoyable, leave a like. Leave your questions, comments, thoughts down below, and if you're interested in seeing more content like this, then hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching guys, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.